One of the most complex things of the work I do is keeping the pipeline filled with interesting review samples. I therefore always have subjects at hand that I run if the pipeline runs dry. Well, almost always. For this week I'm completely without any subject, so I'll fill in an often made request to tell a bit more about myself. I was born only 9 years after World War II. Europe was recovering from the devastation of the war. There was a shortage of anything and ration stamps were abandoned only for a year. 3 years earlier my mother got pregnant, so she married my father as soon as possible and moved in with his parents. After my sister was born, they bought a hairdresser's salon with some financial help from her father. Far from the birth ground to limit family shame. It was a difficult start of an extremely good marriage. A year later I was born, shortly after the big 1953 flood of Zeeland, the river delta in the southwest of the Netherlands. Every cent countrymen could spare went to Zeeland and not to hairdressers. Those were rough times, and rough times produce rough people. I was not an easy child and had clearly different interests than my parents. But I felt the national pressure to build up the country again. That's all stuff school dropouts like me are made of. So I started to work in what was then the high-end hi-fi shop in my country, Muziek Staphorst. The technology had my full attention and I read about any book and magazine I could lay my hands on. The company also had a semi-professional audio department delivering multi-track systems to musicians. There I found the famous magazine Studio Sound that taught me a lot, especially the reviews of Hugh Ford. His work has had an enormous influence on my style of working when I started writing later on. That came about when I was outsourced by my employer to the publishing company that had a project called Play and Work with Sound. Right. It was a book and a DIY mixing desk kit that I had to demo to the show visitors. At that time multitrack became popular while the mixer was a broadcast mixer, which is a completely different beast. But that's how I met the late Hein ten Bos, the editor-in-chief of the then leading hi-fi magazine in the Netherlands, Stereotest. I told him that there were rather big errors in an article on noise reduction. He simply asked if I knew better. When I confirmed, he just said that I should write an article and that he was quite willing to pay for it. I was in seventh heaven and wrote the article and was immediately asked to write another. At that time I thought that was because I was good. Looking back, I now know it must have been because it only was the best he could get. As the Dutch saying goes, amongst the blind one eye is king. When in 1980 the Amsterdam-based Special Audio Products, SAP for short, had a vacancy, I started working there. They were the distributor of professional brands like Allen & Heath and DBX and were a big player in the smaller studios and personal studio markets. But I had learned so much about audio technique that it got more and more in the way of selling equipment. I had done a private course in math and learned a lot from speaking to the professionals in the studios and theatres. In 1983 the recording industry entered quite a recession. Vinyl lost the market's interest and CD was not yet introduced. SAP had to fire someone and I volunteered. When I moved to SAP it was just after my daughter was born, and when I left SAP in 1983 my wife was pregnant from our son, and we both didn't see any problem. I was on unemployment benefit for 2 months, for I soon worked freelance for many magazines. First only Dutch magazines, but after that for the UK version of Pro Sound News, published by Linkhouse Publication that also published Studio Sound. and I wrote for One2One about professional copying media like cassette tapes. I even did an article for Studio Sound. Later on, Peter van Willenswaard, later one of the founders of Grim Audio, started to work for me, and together we were rather successful. I was very unhappy about how some publishers mashed up my articles by hiring cheap and thus poor editors. It damaged my image in the market, and when I quit working for a publisher for this reason, the industry asked me to start a good magazine for the Dutch professional audio market. That plan was to fund a publishing company and have me work as editor-in-chief. I didn't like to be working for an advertiser-controlled publishing company, so I kindly refused. Then the late Peter Bollen, founder of Ela Audio and designer of the mixing console I had to demo on that show, suggested to back up advertising contracts with letters of credit, so I could get a finance base on that. That was the start of Context Publishers. Journalistically it was very well respected, but business-wise it had very hard times surviving the Gulf War crisis and the ones that followed. Publishing a second magazine, audio for the consumer market with a fresh eye on the upcoming streaming equipment, didn't take off as expected. Perhaps because we were early with streaming, but also because the internet was slowly taking over the function of print in the vertical markets. I had given my shares as collateral to my printer to keep the company financed. The bank crisis plus the development in printing business, adding up to the ever-growing internet, had to lead to an end of the company, and that happened in 2011. And perhaps the fact that I never accepted any influence of advertisers on editorial had something to do with it. The professional audio industry had no need for magazines anymore, and the consumer audio business was decimated by the banking crisis. I soon found a job writing press releases and brochures, but that didn't make me very happy. So when that stopped, I decided to go studying again. The kids were on their own by now, and my wife had a good job. I knew my value in the audio industry, but also knew that no one outside that industry was interested in an old geezer of 58 when there are lots of young people around. I started a website, but reading long text on the web was not appreciated enough, and selling ads to those that I refused influence on the editorial didn't seem a road to good success. The site was in Dutch and in English, but advertising on the web is still done like with print, locally. I was sure a time would come that manufacturers would realize that adverts on the web are not bound to borders, but I wouldn't want to wait for them to find out. One of the things I had finalized during this time was my two-step approach to loudspeaker placement. I realized I needed graphics and animation too. I suggested in the family that perhaps a YouTube video might be the best for this. My daughter, who is an actress, immediately suggested to train me in text handling and presentation, help me with the set dressing and learn me how to powder my shiny skull. This led, exactly 5 years ago, to 2 versions of the first video, a 2-step approach to loudspeaker placement. There was a long version and a short version, together watched 225,000 times now. They got 3,600 thumbs up against 71 thumbs down. I then started to release videos on an irregular basis and learned how to be the lighter, gaffer, cameraman, soundman, makeup artist, talking head, editor, graphics artist and so on. It took me over a year to develop a workable pace. August 2015 I was able to produce 1 video a week, barely. Today I can produce a video within 16 to 20 hours, excluding research and testing the equipment. My videos have been watched over 4.2 million times. There are 35,000 subscribers responsible for only 32% of the views, meaning that over 100,000 people from 168 countries watch my videos. The largest concentration of viewers are in North America and Northwest Europe. People that wondered where I got my knowledge now know that I have learned it the old way. Training on the job and self-study. My membership of the Audio Engineering Society also brought me a lot, especially since the Dutch section has always been very active in organizing lectures. It also helps being a journalist, since especially technicians want their design to be explained correctly and thus tell you all you need to know, which I then verified with others, of course. Books are a good source too. Floyd Toole's Sound Reproduction is a wealth of information. The subtitle is The Acoustics and Psychoacoustics of Loudspeakers and Rooms, which says it all. For people without technical training, like me, it is a hard read, but that didn't stop me, so why should it stop you? The second title I would recommend is The Art of Digital Audio by John Watkinson, or the light version, An Introduction to Digital Audio. The first is very comprehensive and in-depth, the second is slightly more accessible. Even better accessible is Ken Polman's Principles of Digital Audio. If you're involved with production of music, Bobcat's Mastering Audio, The Art and the Science is a must-read. The Library of the Audio Engineering Society is a very good source too, although for most papers you have to pay unless you are a member or supporting member. See the comments below this video on YouTube for a list of the books and the link to the AES. You might have to press more to see it. That's it for this week. There will be another video next Friday as always at 5 PM Central European Time. If you don't want to miss that, subscribe to this channel or follow me on the social media so you'll be warned when new videos are out. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Many thanks to all that support this channel financially. It keeps me independent and thus trustworthy. If you also feel like supporting my work, the links are in the comments below this video on YouTube. I'm Hans Beekhuizen, thank you for watching and see you in the next show or on the hbproject.com. And whatever you do, enjoy the music.